Bob! Are you kidding me? It's right there! Bob, if they get in this door, I am dead! Did you just move the hammer towards you? Really?
Night of the Living Dead is one of the most iconic yet controversial films of its time. Written and directed by George Romero in 1968, we saw this film shock the world. A ragtag group of individuals locked in a house trying to survive the disease of what's infecting the world today. Oh, I'm sorry, not today, in the 60s. But this disease is not just a zombie apocalypse, it's uglier. And in this video, I'm going to tell you the connections between Night of the Living Dead and racism. And that starts right now. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to my channel. If you're returning, thank you so much. If you're here for the first time, if y'all can do me a favor and go ahead and subscribe and hit that little bell so you can get alerts whenever I post out some new videos. Now, if you've never seen Night of the Living Dead, you should take an opportunity to watch it. Again, if horror films are your thing. This was the film for me that definitely defined my love for the subgenre of zombie films. I was not introduced to the 1968 version of this movie until later on in life. My first introduction to Night of the Living Dead was the 1990 remake by Tony Savant. Either way, it led me to realize that there's something way different about these films. Like, it's not just about zombies, although zombies are obviously trying to overtake the community, the world, or this one specific home. But before I talk about the 90s, we have to talk about its predecessor. We have to talk about the original 1968 version written and directed by George Romero. We see the ragtag crew that are in the house. Barbara, Ben, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper. I don't even know their names. I think one of them is like, whatever, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper. And then a young couple that are very much, you can tell, local. First, let's talk about Ben and Barbara. Barbara is the first person that we're going to see in this film. In fact, we get the iconic Barbara, they're coming to get you, Barbara. That whole thing with a brother messing around with his sister as they visit their dead relative at a cemetery where this zombie outbreak starts. When Barbara finds herself running for her life from the cemetery to this abandoned home, she comes across an individual by the name of Ben. She is blinded by the light of his truck. She can't see who he is, but then he makes his way towards her. She kind of falls into his hands, and then Ben brings her into the house and takes care of her the whole film. At one point in time, Barbara is starting to get a little bit hysterical and starts to act out. She's nervous, she's scared, understandable. Ben is trying to get her to eventually calm down. But what ends up happening next is shocking for 1968. Now, mind you, we're at the point of the civil rights movement where things have shifted a bit, but segregation is still pretty much a real thing back then. Trying to keep her from getting hysterical, Ben, after being struck by Barbara, strikes her back. Today, that may not be so much a moment, but in 1968, you know that shocked individuals. And that was something that sent a loud, resonating, what is going on in this film? Ben keeps his cool. That is until we introduce Mr. Cooper. Mr. Cooper tends to challenge Ben and ask him questions like, wait, we've been here this whole time. You've heard her scream. We've been fighting some zombies and you've been down in the cellar. Why? Why didn't you come up? Why didn't you help us? Mr. Cooper responds with, I'm safe. Why am I going to compromise my safety to help out people that I just don't know? That starts conflict between Ben and Mr. Cooper. So much so that it becomes obvious that there's a communication between the two of them that is unintentionally speaking of the tensions of their time. We fast forward. Zombies are just a distraction at this point. The conflict between the two of them becomes the centerpiece. We fast forward. Mind you, spoiler alerts. Barbara ends up dying. The Coopers end up dying. That young couple that's with them end up dying. And the long survivor in this all is Ben. Ben ends up in the cellar protecting himself because the zombies have completely overtaken, or rather the ghouls that they're known as back then, were overtaking the house. So he ends up in the cellar. Once everything starts to kind of like relax and he starts hearing that people are coming, and he starts to make his way, ascend up the stairs and out of the cellar. He eventually ends up out and walking around the house with the rifle that he had to protect himself. At this point in time in the movie, there is a group of individuals known as a posse. They were country bumpkin, shotgun wielding, tobacco chewing type crew, very down south. Now, mind you, this film was taped and very much known to be in Pittsburgh, PA, and the surrounding suburbs and rural areas. So we weren't down deep south, but these individuals were portrayed as a very deep south individuals. As they're looking to eliminate some of the ghouls or the zombies that are around the house, one person says, "I hear something." You see Ben in the window with a rifle. He looks very much human, but nonetheless, the shot was taken and they end up killing Ben. One Boston Globe journalist writing up about his remembering of this movie says that it was clearly that because he looked like a threat, because he was African American, that they felt they needed to take the shot. Once the shot was taken, then the sheriff says, "There's another one for the fire." Keep that in mind. At the end of this film, there's a montage of very disturbing images. Let's fast forward to the 1990 remake. He knew that there was racial tensions in the original film, and he played it up in the 90s. Let's go to Barbara real quick. Barbara's character shifts from the 60s to the 90s. Yeah, she was shook and kind of hysterical about the whole zombie thing with her brother and her running for her life. But as the film progresses, so does her courage, so does her realization. She becomes very much a leader towards the end. In fact, almost becomes the voice of reasoning between two individuals that just can't see eye to eye. We see Ben and Mr. Cooper right out the gate the minute Mr. Cooper comes out of the cellar. Now, here's some things that's very different than the 68 version in the 90s remake, is that Ben looks very much working class and Mr. Cooper looks very much high class. He has a tuxedo, his wife is wearing pearls, gold watch, the whole thing. They are playing up how obviously different these two individuals are. Outside of skin, they're letting it know that financially they're also extremely different. They're playing up the 90s as well. There's a shot between Ben and Mr. Cooper facing each other. I thought it was a powerful shot, especially because Mr. Cooper had the audacity to say, "Well, it doesn't look like you are neighbors here," obviously implying that since Ben is black, that he doesn't belong in rural Pennsylvania. These two bicker nonstop. Now, in the original 68 film, we saw Ben trying to board up windows, and he's boarding up windows pretty early. However, in the 90s film, that's not what's happening. In the 90s film, they don't start boarding up windows until the interaction between Ben and Mr. Cooper. Once those individuals start going at each other, then the noise starts to pick up. Hammering, banging, arguing, banging, hammering, windows, board. The more they make noise, the more the zombies are attracted to that house. The director was subtle about this, not saying that he was intentional, but if he was, it was masterful. At the end, very much like the original film, everyone's dead except three individuals: Barbara, Ben, and Mr. Cooper. This is what happened. Ben once again goes down into the cellar. He ends up dying down in the cellar. As the posse comes back again, They open up the cellar door, and there Ben comes out as a zombie, and with no expression on their face, almost with a tint of joy, they shoot down Ben. But Mr. Cooper comes down. Barbara sees him. He says, "You've come back. You've come back." And Barbara's eyes flare up with some level of hatred and disdain, and she pulls a gun and she shoots Mr. Cooper. The two posse members that already shot down Ben look at this as disturbing. They look like, wow, a dead human being. Now, why would they have that expression if just earlier they were mowing down zombies? But this one, Barbara says in this film, we are them and they are us. The disease that's out there is not of a zombie apocalypse. It's just something a lot greater. The end of this film kind of picks up as well with disturbing montage videos of zombies being let out. Not just Ben, but zombies. But you can kind of get that uncomfortable feeling of where the director is going with this. Racism is a disease unlike anything. It affects humanity and our ability to look at individuals as human. We look at pigmentation of skin. We look at individuals as if they are lower than us, or we look at individuals because of their skin as they are higher than us. It's a disease that is put in place by Satan himself. Why do I say this? Because Satan can't stand the unity of humanity. He can't stand the fact that Jesus came down to give us life, to redeem us. He couldn't stand that. So what better way than to make sure that we remain divided? The Catechism of the Catholic Church says the following: the equality of men rests essentially on their dignity as persons and the rights that flow from it. Every form of social or cultural discrimination and fundamental personal rights on the grounds of sex, race, color, social conditions, language, or religion must be curbed and eradicated as incompatible with God's design. Incompatible with God's design. I, myself, am Puerto Rican. I know what it's like to be discriminated against. Now, I can't fully understand what it feels like to be discriminated because of the color of my skin. Because the color of my skin is brown or light. That's it. And an individual sees that. I have a fighting chance when I get somewhere because I happen to look outside of this, but the color of my skin gives me somewhat of a fighting chance until I put my last name and then an eyebrow is raised on whether or not I'm legal or illegal. And then that's when things just go haywire. So I will never understand, but I stand alongside my black brothers and sisters because they are judged right out the gate because of the color of their skin. Night of the Living Dead had a chilling connection to racism. But no, as stated in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, that it is not in accordance to the design of our humanity. We are created in the image and likeness of our God. So yes, to quote Barbara, we are them and they are us. And we're the ones who are the true walking dead. We're the ones that are walking throughout the world just very much cynically looking to feed on something. We're the ones. If we want to get rid of this infection, and the best way to do it is to look at ourselves and realize that although we may not be able to live together, it sure ain't gonna help if we die together. This is your boy 210, and this was one more of those chilling Catholic connections. God bless you guys, and in the meantime, stay peaceful.